All right, so now we're going to share from the first breakout room discussion. These were the questions. So what concerns have come up regarding students who have been medically compromised in your district, and how are you addressing those concerns? Would any DPI staff love to share out some of the things that they heard in their breakout sessions, or our DPA staff collaborators?
This is Carlin. I can share what happened in room 17, which I did get into, Daniel. Thank you very much. One of the things that we discussed was the ways in which we can be sure we are continuing to address the educational need for OT, PT, and speech as related services, and possibly even nursing services, and not allow ourselves to fall back into an older model of more medically based or siloed services, but to maintain that educational relevance. So we had some good conversations about A, how difficult that is, and then B, ways to use the IEP, the CCR IEP process as it relates to the disability related needs, and then the goal development, to kind of help us monitor that as we have those conversations.
Anyone else want to share some of the concerns that came up or how they're addressing those concerns?
This is Alicia. I'd love to share what my group discussed during this first breakout session. Several of our group members had students who were being served at home based on their medical conditions and their unique needs. And the group had a really strong conversation around how important collaborating with parents was during this time. A group member shared some information she learned recently at a CISA2 collaboration meeting around parent coaching, and that really taking some structure to parent coaching and supporting parents in delivering some instruction and participating in therapies for this group of students at home was important. Another group member shared how important it was to streamline the communication with parents around that coaching, and so really making sure having one place that parents went for directions and places to ask questions. This individual used one Google slide presentation that they built on over time. And so just taking into account those considerations when having just that stronger need for collaboration with parents.
Thank you. Anyone else, DPI staff or DPI collaborators who want to share?
Yeah, so I can share some of the stuff that we talked about in our group. We had one participant that was looking for ideas of how to approach the individual meeting around a child whose parents decided not to send them to school when their high school is a blended situation. And we kind of talked around starting from what you know and where and what works, and moving on from there through the lens of the different things that show up with blended learning and virtual learning and access to items. But the other thing that we discussed that was a really interesting conversation was around when staff members are not showing up with the belief system that the PPE works, and therefore are not using that or using it properly around our medically fragile students. And how do we meet them where they're at to help not say you have to do this otherwise you'll get punished, but to help bring people to where we need them to be so that everybody is safe. And that conversation of how we root cause the need for the child sometimes, but there are staff that we kind of have to think about, well, why do we think that they're showing up not really wanting to wear a mask or saying we don't really need a mask? Other layers to that we can show up for them as well as peers and as fellow educators. Because there isn't anybody that shows up saying, I want to cause harm to children, right? Most educators, if not all educators, I would hope, aren't in that mindset. And so there's some other piece there. So in my mind, it was an interesting dynamic of a conversation about how we're showing up for kids and the lens we have to look through that's very different for that. But also how we're showing up for our other educators, especially our support staff that is directly next to and in a lot of our students' spaces a lot of their day. I thought that was a really cool conversation that came out of our group.
Thank you. Anyone else that wants to share out on this breakout room discussion before we go to the next one?
Daniel, this is Iris. That made me think of some of the calls I'm getting from staff who are concerned where they have students who have a lot of oral secretions due to drooling, or maybe they have some behavioral communication type of concerns where they may bite or hit or scratch, and how those things would work out in this idea of protecting themselves as well as the other students in that classroom. So it has a little bit of a behavioral piece to it too.
Thank you. All right, let's look at the second group discussion.
So we wanted just to give you an opportunity to think about how you would handle a student. So Esmeralda is a kindergarten student. She's enrolling for the first time in your district. She has G-button feeding. Her family's goal is to use a walker and ambulate, write her name, and learn to count money. Currently, her family transports her. She is in a wheelchair due to safety concerns with falling, and your district's going to perform an initial evaluation. So just really, again, looking globally, what are her disability-related needs? How might you do that in the face of COVID, both for virtual or face-to-face instruction in your contingency plan? So,
would anyone like to share out some of the discussions from this second breakout room discussion, specifically from the scenario that we shared? What are the disability-related needs, how they would address those in face-to-face or virtual instruction in a contingency plan, or discuss how the school, if they had an outbreak of COVID-19, how might that change their plans?
just but the case study. So I just wanted to share this because I was impressed by this, because I hadn't heard other people think in these terms before, because we were talking about the issue of suctioning and how that is kind of like some people's nightmare to think about. How are we going to handle that? How do we keep have the student there, not only delegate the procedure, keep the staff safe when you're using a procedure that could aerosolize secretions, but then how do you keep the classmates safe also? And so one of the members had kind of done that planning already and had those scenarios, and so one of their thought processes is that they would actually move the other students, in the fact that sometimes the suctioning you can't really get a student to a classroom or to that safe space that you created for them to be suctioned. So instead, what they would do is move the other students out of the room and have some other place for them to go to, so that the student could be suctioned while they're still in their classroom. And then you obviously have to deal with cleaning the room afterwards. But I thought that was kind of a different take that I really haven't heard other schools use. And I know when I've talked to parents are a little upset that you're going to move their students someplace or isolate them. So it's kind of a different thought process. No, they get to stay in the classroom. You're just removing the students who your child puts in danger, is kind of the thought process there. But there's a different I don't know, emphasis, same results, but a different emphasis that I thought was interesting and creative for that group. So
Thank you. Any other share out for this one?
I was just going to mention, in the situation that Louise was just talking about, if all the students are removed from the classroom, that in essence becomes a special ed environment then. So just thinking about that, just because you're still in the regular ed classroom, but if there are no regular ed kids in that classroom, then you have the LRE is impacted in that situation.
Great, thank you.
And I think in that situation, probably the whole classroom was special education,
Oh, okay.
other students, but they are obviously a little bit more mobile and could get out of the room so that they're not, at risk of, inhaling those secretions.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I know it's been a long day. We will re-edit this presentation and break it into little pieces like we have been. And Louise, thank you so much for all of your expertise and your work with our team. And we appreciate everything that you do for school nurses and educators and families and students. Thank you, Carlin, and thank you, Iris, for pulling this presentation together and adding content in your areas of expertise. Thank you to our interpreters, and thank you to all the DPI staff who make this possible.